Good evening, everyone. My name is Jackie Urmey, and I am a recent graduate from Monmouth University, hence my affiliation. I'm going to be following Shannon's presentation with another location in New Jersey with Revolutionary War era shipwrecks in Crosswicks Creek specifically. So I wanted to thank you to the Archaeological Society of New Jersey for having us present this evening. This presentation that I'm going to share is kind of a snippet of some of my graduate work, which really focused on trying to identify the vessel classification of a specific wreck in Crosswicks Creek. So without further ado, I will show you where Crosswicks Creek is located in New Jersey, at least at the location where the wrecks discussed in my work are located. Crosswicks Creek actually does creep all the way from Bordentown, New Jersey. It goes all the way up northeast and all the way down southeast, and it actually originates right around New Egypt, which is interesting because that's how I commute to work every day. So I realized, oh, I kind of commuted right over the beginning of where this creek starts, yet it traverses over hills and up and down and all the way until it meets the Delaware River. And Crosswicks Creek is a huge tributary. So Crosswicks Creek is actually a pretty historical location. For those of you who are familiar with it, this will be a nice little review, especially as we're coming up to the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. So there's a lot of historical documentation that talks about the presence of Revolutionary War era ships in Crosswicks Creek. There was a numerous amount of letters between the Continental Navy Board and General George Washington that indicate many merchant and continental vessels were stored up Crosswicks and nearby creeks to protect them from the British. Cargo and weapons were typically removed from the vessels in advance before they were scuttled, or either they were sent up these creeks, either on land or just shoved up the creeks. So there's a lot of history that goes on over the period of about 6 months or so. Crosswicks Creek was used to store some of these vessels. And it seemed like the last portion of the vessels that made it up there may have been kind of hastily stored, and we're going to explore that in a couple minutes. So records indicate a minimum of 29 to at least 44 colonial vessels were destroyed along the Delaware, including in Crosswicks Creek. Now, George Washington in March of 1778 had requested the dismantling of the Continental Navy, and what wound up happening was every last vessel that they had, they wound up putting up into these creeks, Crosswicks and nearby creeks. So the British were definitely coming. Washington made this order, and Crosswicks Creek got a name. So the most detailed report of the destruction was provided by a British officer, Captain John Henry, and he indicated that specifically in Crosswicks Creek, a sturdy beggar privateer, along with 8 brigs, sloops, and schooners were destroyed. So this wound up occurring in May 1778 along a 2-day period of time. And this image here is a replica of a Revolutionary War era merchant vessel that unfortunately went up in flames. But it just shows how devastating destruction to these vessels truly are. It does not take much for them to burn. And the amount of time it goes into creating these beautiful vessels, these historical replicas, or even ships at the time and energy that went into making them, just to see how quickly they can be destroyed, can be pretty sobering. So following the British evacuation and colonial re-entry to Philadelphia in June 1778, the efforts to raise the ships in the Delaware by the Continental military, they were only partially successful. So several conclusions can be made from the historical documents available. Oops, wrong mouse. If you're interested in what those documents are, let me know. I can happily get you that information. There's just too many to include tonight, but they're pretty cool. So first, there are 4 Revolutionary War era vessels that were not raised in Crosswicks Creek. One of them, a privateer called the Sturdy Beggar, was sunk in the creek. And it's exciting because Shannon just shared a really nice overview of privateers and their role. And it's neat to think that we may have the name of this vessel, although no more research does need to be done. Privately owned vessels were not given priority in terms of being raised. So a lot of times, if it wasn't a continental vessel that was created for, used for the Army, like a privateer or possibly even like a merchant vessel, those would not have been given a priority to being raised. So if they didn't have the resources to raise them, a lot of them were not raised and returned to their owners, especially if a merchant vessel was, you know, commandeered for military purposes. They were supposed to be returned, but it did not always happen. And thirdly, there exists no conclusive evidence of any additional state naval or war vessels lost or remaining in the creek. I did a comprehensive review and looked over the 57 continental military vessels at that time, and there's no records of any of those remaining or being lost in the creek. So this leaves us with the most probable vessel type as the colonial merchant vessel. So some really amazing work on Crosswicks Creek was conducted in the 1980s. Shannon mentioned Jack Fulmer. He was a huge asset to these investigations. Most times he was the man who found them. And then he wound up raising the flags and got people involved, and he found a way to get archaeologists in to survey. Jack was an honorary archaeologist, not by degree, but by hobby. So these wrecks specifically here that you can see, Barges Creek and Site 3 in Crosswicks Creek, those are two wrecks that are now in the National Register of Historic Places. Barges Creek in 1986 and eventually Crosswicks Creek in 1990. So these sites were first given archaeological surveying time after the surveys in the area of the Trenton complex for the 295 bridge in the 1980s, early 1980s. Prior to that, these wrecks had been discovered by locals and talked about, and there was some folklore, but no one really ever had taken pictures and gone out and done much with them until this. So the 1986 investigation of the sites was completed it was the first organized investigation. They did some remote sensing and an evaluation and identification of the condition of these two wrecks. So Site 1 and Site 3 on this map look awfully close together. However, Site 1, the Barges Creek wreck, is in Hamilton Township in Mercer County, New Jersey, while Site 3 is in Bordentown City, Burlington County, New Jersey. They're actually just over 1,000 feet away from each other and in completely different counties. So if you go to the State Historic Preservation Office and you're looking for the files on them, don't be like me and wonder why are they not in the Mercer County file, or why are they not in both the Burlington County file. They're in two separate files, which makes it super fun to research these things because you never know what you're going to find. So Barges Creek was pretty exciting. My research mainly focused on Site 3. So this is Site 1, which I want to give an honorable mention to because there's just so many outstanding photographs and documentation of the wreck itself. So this wreck also proposed to be a small merchant vessel, Revolutionary War, built for speed, and it had 18th century workmanship. She was about 60% intact, well preserved, and a sharply built vessel of 65 to 85 tons burden. Now, tonnage in ships meant how many tons were they capable of carrying for cargo. Didn't talk about how heavy the ship was with that. It just talked about tonnage really just means capacity. So we have a relatively small vessel here, and this was found even further up Crosswicks Creek. So remember that, we have a smaller vessel found up Crosswicks Creek. A little further south of that, we have Site 3. Now, Site 3 had significantly less remaining, which is probably why I picked it for a project, because I can't help but choose the more challenging of the two, and 15 to 20% remaining of this one. Site 3 wreck, they lie on a sandbar in the middle of a creek. So you can imagine the amount of, we're going to talk about vessel interpretations in a couple minutes, just a quick view. But it's really neat to see how many impacts there were to this vessel over the past almost 250 years. So here are some images of Site 3 from above water. So Jack Fulmer in the 1980s was able to go to this location during a blowout tide. So that pretty much means the tide is actually pretty much negative anything. You really have less water than you would even at your lowest tide. And he lucked out and got some really fantastic pictures. And they also wound up going back and doing research at these blowout tides. So here we have one view of this vessel, and really all you can see, it looks like not much to the untrained eye. And this can be challenging to kind of decipher. So I decided to put this other hand-drawn map close to it so you can see the similarities, and it also has components of the vessel underneath it. Kind of a list and a legend. So you can kind of see, if you're familiar with ship construction, you can kind of see what parts of the ship this is. So this is another view. I'm going to go to another image, the opposite view of the same exact components of the vessel, the Site 3 wreck. And here you can see us kind of looking down towards Bordentown shore. And all we have here are the fragments of the extreme lower hull of the vessel, below the turn of the bilge. And the bilge is the actual lowest portion of a ship that you can get. So previous research confirmed this was constructed using techniques commonly employed in the 18th century. So now let's move into what we did. Pretty neat. We got some really beautiful pictures. This is the confluence of the Delaware River and Crosswicks Creek on top. On the bottom are our fantastic John boats that we used to get out there. We did some recon. This is actually the location of Site 3. If you were actually on the water, pretty much looking right at it, but you can't see it because we did not go there during a blowout tide, and I really wish we had, but COVID-19 hit and it kind of halted our ability to get back out there this year. So Shannon talked a little bit about some of the technology, and don't worry, there are images underwater that I'm going to share. But this technology we used was a hummingbird side scan sonar, which actually kind of sends pings out underneath water, and it sends back pretty much the shadows of what it hits. So if there are bumps on the bottom, if there are any kind of artifacts or any kind of objects or contacts on the bottom of the surface of the floor of the creek bottom, sometimes the sea bottom, the side scan sonar would give you like a side view of that. So when you look at the images of side scan, you almost have to lay your head down sideways and imagine you're staring out from the bottom of the boat. What shadows would you see? And what we're seeing is kind of that, which is hard to do. It is hard if you haven't stared at these images for a very long time to kind of understand how you're supposed to look at them. So don't feel bad if you look at some of the images and you're like, I don't even know what I'm looking at here. No offense taken. We used the GPS, and we also attempted to do some magnetometry work with the, let's see, the magnetometer, which is this large orange tube. It was a Marine Magnetics Explorer magnetometer. So magnetometry is, it maps the magnetic field of the Earth's surface. So it has to be directly above the item you're actually trying to explore. And it can pick up any kind of feedback, any kind of magnetic anomalies underneath. Unfortunately, we were not able to pick up any necessary magnetic interference. There was no magnetic signature, which really indicates that there were no iron or ferrous materials at the site when we were studying. So we were not able to locate any artifacts during our study. So I wanted to give you just a quick overview of the location, zoomed in a little further. So we have possible additional wreck remains that we did locate. I'll show you a quick image of that. The actual Site 3 wreck remains, and what you can see on the bottom, that little green dot just talks about the coordinates from previous research. So we were able to correct, I don't want to call it an error, but perhaps a discrepancy on the coordinates from the 1980s National Register documentation. When we went to look for the site in that specific coordinate location on the bottom, we were not able to find the site. So some reasons for that could be that there's a conversion issue between coordinate systems, and there may have been an inability to validate the accuracy of the coordinates at the time of the National Register nomination due to how much GPS really truly has advanced since then. So here we go with what we think may be an additional shipwreck. Even though that wasn't the focus of my study, if somebody's out there watching this and you want to get in on this, let me know. We're pretty excited that we may have found something also that it looks like there's some type of ribbing down here. And this is side scan. So imagine you're laying down and you're kind of like on the bottom of the creek and you're looking out. If you had a light, what would it hit? And you're kind of seeing the shadows on the back end. That's what these are. These are shadows. The light's hitting this part, these dark shadows. So what this says is this is sticking up out of the ground, right? The longer the shadow, the higher protruding the object. And you can kind of see here, there's something kind of sharp sticking up, and here you've got this really nice long shadow. So there's definitely something down there. And not to mention, we have what appears to be ribbing. You can see those long shadows, those narrow shadows. That's usually indicative of some type of ribbing. Not to mention, it really does kind of look like a boat, but sometimes it's not what you think it is. So this is where we found our Site 3 vessel. As you can see, it lines up pretty well with the previous hand drawing from Jack Fulmer, which is pretty exciting. We have his wreck was located here, and we have it right here with up-to-date archaeological methods. We even can take this image I showed you previously, and you can kind of line it up with the side scan image of the wreck, which if you're not experienced in looking at this stuff, this looks pretty much like nothing. But again, it took me hours, but I finally figured out how to read this thing. And I wanted to put some of these brackets in here to kind of highlight what it is exactly seems to resemble these hand drawings from the 1980s. Now keep in mind, this is the first time anyone's had eyes on this wreck since 1986. So what are we at, about 30 years? No one's done research, no one's looked at it. So what we're looking at underwater now is an additional 30 plus years of impacts to this site. And what's really exciting, which again, if you don't know what this is, totally okay, but we have what looks like 3 distinct lines of wreckage. So this is the picture I just showed you, where it looks like it's kind of part of the hull. But now we've got, you can see these long, narrow, kind of like they look like dots from this angle. If you turned it, it would have a completely different take. But then here we have more. You can see these reflective spots right here. And look, there's even more. We've got what looks like more planking. It's pretty interesting. So more research is needed to determine what exactly this is. However, it's very likely that these may be a collapsed bulkhead with the starboard and the port sides of the vessel. So this wreck may have measured between 65 to 90 feet. So a little bit larger than the vessel at Site 1, which was further up the creek. So it's interesting because it made it further up, which means it possibly was a lighter vessel. This vessel was not as far up Crosswicks Creek. There's a chance it was a heavier vessel. And so we think this may have had about a 100-ton burden. So definitely more than the Site 1 vessel, but also challenging for vessel classification. Shannon did a nice overview of comparing vessels, and I took some of the same ones to use when I was doing this one. It's a lot of similar construction techniques, and that's a whole nother presentation. But mainly the majority of the vessels were constructed of oak, so there was a confirmation that the vessel of Site 3 was oak. Trunnels are tree nails or wooden nails made back in the pre-industrial revolution. There were spikes and drift pins. We had scarfed timbers, which was a way of connecting timbers that were not long enough in their natural state for the purpose to which they were going to be used. Timber measurements were very similar, so there wasn't a whole lot of variation. Spacing and sacrificial sheathing, which was definitely used on vessels that helped it when vessels were in warm water. Sacrificial sheathing helped with the teredo worms of the southern warmer waters. They tend to eat through the hull. So they would put the sacrificial sheathing of tar and animal hair on the lower portion of the hull, and the teredo worms would not have a whole lot of success with that, and they definitely wouldn't be able to penetrate to get to the hull. Let's see, so we have some impacts to the site over time, which I'm going to touch on super quickly. We have climate and weather events. There were tidal changes, construction, dredging, pollution, and land use activities. And definitely sedimentation. We have sediment transport and deposition were factors in the current state of the remains. What probably has happened over time is these remains tended to have some type of destruction to them, erosion, they were disturbed, the wreckage was disarticulated, and then there was sedimentation from changes in underwater and sand currents. So what's pretty exciting here is we do believe we have Site 3 wreck remains location confirmed. We have an up-to-date coordinate location. We weren't able to determine vessel classification and the purpose of the vessel. Was it used for military purposes or not? We can surmise it was, however, we don't have that proof yet. We do believe it was a colonial merchant vessel for cargo. We used a lot of teamwork during this. We partnered with Stockton in terms of resources, which was fantastic. We did make new observations of a known site up to date and also possibly identified a new wreck. And research recommendations are definitely to try to get back out there so we can document more of this wreck before it does eventually deteriorate. So we definitely believe that the wreck remains exposed on the creek floor will likely deteriorate further over time, while the remains under sediment will probably be well preserved in their natural underwater burial environment. I want to thank you all for your time so much, and that concludes the Crosswicks Creek presentation.